Hello and a very warm welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Sanam Shantier. Coming up on our programme, the US, France and the UK strike Syria over a suspected chemical attack. We bring you reactions from regional experts. 3 weeks of Gaza's March of the Return. The weekly protests have ended in the deaths of some 34 Palestinians, with no end in sight. Also coming up, our special guest this week, Dunya Mikhail, an Iraqi writer who's just released a book about Yazidi women held captive by the Islamic State group. She joins us from New York to talk about the Beekeeper, rescuing the stolen women of Iraq. We start with Syria, which was struck by the US, France and Britain this Saturday in a first coordinated attack against the Damascus government. The 100 missiles reportedly targeted chemical weapon sites in retaliation for a suspected gas attack in the city of Douma. And reactions have been pouring in from the international community and regional experts. Here at France 24, we've compiled some of those comments for you.
Not only were they legitimate, but they were legal. I think the best reasoning is to be found in the declaration of the UK ambassador to the United Nations. And she invoked the humanitarian protection.
We can ask, was it legitimate to launch these strikes? From the standpoint of international law, no, because there was no UN resolution. But the use of chemical weapons by Assad over 4 or 5 years under terrible conditions is also well outside international law.
Mr. Putin is in a trap, you know. He doesn't know how to manage the situation in Syria. He also needs pretty peaceful Syria in order to keep his two bases, the air bases in Latakia and his naval bases in Tartus. So he needs to get off this situation. And I think that this strike is going to change things. And now the political process, the diplomatic process is going to start on the new basis.
The UN isn't going to be able to do much with the Russian veto. The bottom line is that for all the sound and fury, as somebody wrote, last weekend's attack by the US, France, and Britain amounted to nothing more than a slap on the wrist of Assad. He is not in any way weakened in terms of his control, and his war effort will continue, I'm afraid.
I think the damages are high. But what we know also is this Mr. Assad doesn't learn very well his lessons, you know. He was struck 1 year ago by the US military, and in 2032, we were almost at the brink of a war against him, but obviously, he doesn't take lessons from all this. So maybe he's going to do it again, and surely France, Great Britain and the US are going to strike again.
The past 3 Fridays have been marked with large-scale protests near the Gaza-Israel border. This despite warnings from Israeli officials to steer clear of that fence. The demonstrators' tire burning and stone throwing have been met with live rounds from snipers, killing some 34 Palestinians. The protesters are demanding the right to return to their homes in what is today Israel. Charles Pellegrin reports on the plight of a number of Gaza residents.
Aisha Zahanan has lived in Gaza for 70 years. She's now 88. And the only thing she has left from her life before her move is carefully stored in this old closet.
These are the keys to my house. I left when I was 18. It's just on the other side of the border, but I was never able to return.
Aisha is what the United Nations call a Palestinian refugee, a member of the Arab families who had to leave their homes following Israel's creation and the ensuing war with its Arab neighbors. Over 750,000 people found refuge in the region, a majority in Jordan, of which the West Bank was a part of, and close to 200,000 on the Gaza Strip. Despite UN resolutions, Israel never allowed them to return home. On the Gaza Strip, 2 out of 3 people have refugee status and rely on humanitarian aid. This is one of the poorest parts of the Middle East and one of the most densely populated places in the world. Every morning, Odai and his father crisscrossed the marketplace to sell mint. The 16-year-old left school, and like 70% of the population here, he lives under the poverty line.
I earn €4 a day. That allows me to eat and buy a few things. There isn't any work in Gaza for young people like me. The blockade makes it really hard.
For 11 years, Israel has controlled all goods and people who enter or leave Gaza by land or sea. Fishermen cannot venture further than a few miles from the coast, and the southern border with Egypt is rarely open. These restrictions were imposed following the rise to power of the Islamist Hamas party, which is considered a terrorist organization by the United States and the European Union. And the worst is yet to come. Demographic growth is such that Gaza will soon be too small for its population. With waste management in disarray and highly polluted waters, a major humanitarian crisis is brewing. The UN has warned that if nothing is done, Gaza will become uninhabitable in the next 2 or 3 years. Odai doesn't see how things will get better.
Young people who want to go to university don't have the money. So many of them put themselves on the firing line on the border so they can get the salary that Hamas promises to the wounded. They don't have work and no way to leave. There's no future in Gaza.
Odai doesn't want Hamas's money, but he'll continue to protest every Friday to make sure Gaza is not forgotten by the international community.
In this week's Middle East Matters, our special guest is Dunya Mikhail, who's an Iraqi writer based in the US. Her book, The Beekeeper, Rescuing the Stolen Women of Iraq, published last month, tells the harrowing tales of Yazidi women who were used as sex slaves by the Islamic State group. She gathered the information over the period of 12 months through phone calls with a man called Abdullah, the beekeeper, who used his earnings from selling honey to put together a network of smugglers and help the women escape the terrorists' clutches. Dunya later traveled to Iraq to meet these women. Photos of them and the trip are published in the book. Dunya Mikhail, thank you very much for joining us here on Middle East Matters. Now, can you tell us what initially drew you to tell the stories of these women?
Well, in the beginning, started with one letter, Noon in Arabic or N in English, that was inscribed on doors of minority groups as a threat for them to leave in 24 hours or get killed. And then when I heard that women were put on sale, in the market, I felt so insulted as a woman.
Now, you went through a middleman, Abdullah. He's the beekeeper himself. His name is in the title of the book. Can you tell us a little bit about this central figure in your book?
Yes, he. When telephone numbers were given to me, I wanted to speak with women. At the third telephone number, I remember he answered. Abdullah answered, the beekeeper, and I learned he's a beekeeper from talking to him that he was selling honey in Sinjar, and that he developed a network of men and women to rescue these women. He tried to first to find his own sister and niece, and then he didn't find them in the beginning. He found other women, but he told me that every time I save a woman, as if I saved my sister.
Now, the book was complete after a year of speaking to Abdullah, but you still decided to go back to Iraq to meet these women.
Yes, I didn't feel it was complete without meeting them face to face. I felt that need to go and meet them. And I went with the questions. However, I didn't ask them those questions I had in mind when I saw them. As if I didn't want to reopen their wounds. And one of them in particular stayed in touch with me, and we kept talking to each other, and she called me sister. And so it's developed some bond where as you may expect that would
Dunya,
happen.
you decided to make this trip, and it was also very much a personal journey for you. You stepped foot in your own country after 2 decades. How was that?
It was, I don't know. I said to one of the women, there's a candy that we call sour sweet, so I describe it as sour sweet. Iraq, to me, it was so surprising, because when I went, I felt that, I expected that I would hear terrible stories from these people, but they tried to give me hope, as if they were trying to console me. They were trying to make me feel better. They were offering me tea all the time. You know, we Iraqis drink a lot of tea, and you know, the custom was still there. They, you know, hospitable. All was, you know.
Now, Dunya, after the Islamic State group's so-called eradication, do you have any hopes for the Yazidi community?
You know, by chance, tomorrow is the Eid, is the New Year for the Yazidi people, and it's tomorrow Wednesday. They call it the Red Wednesday, and they're gonna celebrate in their temple Lalish. That I also visited in that trip, and they part of the rituals, they light 365 candles as hope for the new year, to give light to each day in the coming year. There are still about 3,000 women missing, yet they didn't lose hope.
Dunya Mikhail, writer, poet, and university professor, thank you so much for speaking to us here on Middle East Matters.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, that's it from us this week. Don't forget, if you have any suggestions, you can always reach out to us on Facebook. That's Middle East Matters France 24, and Twitter. Do stay tuned.